You thought I was going to pop up from the bottom now, didn't you? Just like the way I always do. Well, you know what? Times change. And that's what I'm all about. Change. I've been holding off on this subject, Muse, for a while now. I think it's time that I actually address it. And it's a very sensitive little subject, but I think I'm ready to handle it. This issue was brought about actually a few weeks ago when a wonderful woman wanted to sponsor me to be at a convention. I think, and the focus of the convention is an LGBTQ audience, and she wanted to bring me in for my Shiro series. And I was very flattered, of course. But here's the thing. As much as I love the Shiro series and how it means a lot to me, it's always had problems. It's always been problematic for me. It's very hard to market that series, especially now. And that's what I want to address, Muse, because I have a couple of series, well, a series and a book that is problematic. The very first book I ever wrote was A Blade Away. And I've talked about that with you before, about where it came from, that it was inspired by a dear friend of mine who is a member of the trans community here in the city in which I live. And she asked me to come to an event, a meeting. And I said, sure, because she needed some support. And I said, sure, of course. And I went, and it was a lovely occasion, and I met some wonderful people. And I was inspired to write A Blade Away. That was 20 years ago. 20 years is a long time. And things change. Now, 20 years ago, I could say trans, and it would mean a completely different thing. Not a completely different thing, but it would have different connotations than it does now. At least from the eyes of the general public. And when I pondered this issue in the last couple of days, I realized something. And this is the reason why this subject is very hard for me to broach. And I know that there are other authors out there that have this problem with earlier works because of the way society doesn't just change, the way society wakes up. Now, we live in a very woke society. And that's great. That is a great thing. And I have nothing against that. I try very hard to make sure that I myself am woke, and not in the negative connotation that so many people are trying to apply to that word. When I hear, read, or think about woke, I think enlightened. I think educated. I think empathetic to other people's plights. And that's where we need to be as a society. But the problem is that books written 20 years ago don't adhere to the norms of today. So a woke person might read the Shiro series or A Blade Away and go, whoa, 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 you're not using those terms correctly. And that's a problem now. And I am a respectful person, and I respect other people's needs. I respect the whole pronoun thing. In many of my bios, I list my pronouns, he, him, out of respect for those that actually need to actually present their pronouns to other people so there's no confusion. I respect that wholeheartedly. The thing is, though, is that when you read literature from previous generations, you have to understand that it was written in a different mindset. Now, I'm not here to defend Shiro or Blade Away. That's not the point. The point is that this morning that I was actually considering pulling Shiro from the shelves. And considering even possibly rewriting a Blade Away so it would fit today's standards. And I can't do that. Because if I do that to that book right now, then I have to do it knowing that I'm going to have to rewrite every book I have ever written at some point in my career simply because norms have changed. We don't go back and rewrite Shakespeare. There are issues in Shakespeare that could be problematic. Why in the world is it in Hamlet that there is a player queen? Well, it just so happens that back then, that was the norm. And you can't be offended today by what was normal decades ago simply because society wasn't enlightened. You can't blame society for where it is at one particular time. Because remember this, think about this. Decades from now, will society blame the woke for where we were at this period? And I hope not. I hope that society 10, 20, 100 years from now look back today and say the woke society was the start of a new way of thinking. A way to open our eyes to empathy. But as a writer, I can't let that make my decisions for me. Just like if younger generations today, if they were to watch All in the Family, they would implode. When we watched it as little kids, we didn't see what the young generations of today see. We really didn't. When I was a kid, here's the deal. When I was a kid, when I would watch All in the Family, what I saw was someone that I didn't know. Because I didn't know that level of racism. And that level of bigotry. That wasn't a part of my life. And I didn't watch even as a little kid, I didn't watch All in the Family and yuck it up over the patriarch railing against minorities or whatever it was he was doing at the time and say, ha, 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 that's funny, I like him. I didn't. I actually did not like that man. In fact, as a little kid, I was spending more time watching Sanford and Son and What's Happening and The Jeffersons and shows like that. That's just because that's where I was as a child. I wasn't woke. I was a kid. And yes, I do like to consider myself woke now because I have empathy and because I have a functioning brain that says, you know what? You probably need to consider the lives of others when you write, say, or do things. But if I allow myself to pull my work from the shelves because being woke wasn't really a thing 20 years ago, I'm sliding down a fairly slippery slope. Now, I get it. A Blade Away and Shiro were the first two books I ever wrote. And Shiro is especially problematic because I was experimenting with that book, finding a voice and at the same time trying to make a point with a narrator. Make a narrator a cast in the book. So Shiro was very problematic for me as a young writer, but I did it anyway. And I did it as a celebration. So, my heater just kicked on. My furnace just kicked on. I moved my recording studio down to the basement, Muse, so we could have a little bit more privacy. Doesn't matter. But seriously, every writer that I know will probably come into this issue at some point in their lives, or maybe not. I know some writers that, and I'm not knocking them because that's not who I am. More power to them. They write on a level that doesn't ever touch societal issues. I, on the other hand, like to venture down those rabbit holes. I like to challenge myself and to be able to take very challenging issues and make them a part of my work. And moving down into the basement is now sounding like kind of a bad idea. You know what I mean? But we all evolve. Even our processes evolve. I would want to say to everybody that if and when you read A Blade Away and Shiro, that you do so understanding that, number one, they were written at a different time. And number two, that they were written by a fledgling author. They were my first efforts. I'm not apologizing for myself. I'm still proud of those books. I'm proud of what they say. I'm proud of how they say what they say. And I wouldn't change a thing. Now, if I ever go back to Shiro, the Shiro series, which I might do at some point, I would definitely approach it differently. And here's another issue with A Blade Away. 20 years ago, A Blade Away was written. Remember that. And at that time, I was very much influenced by certain people and things. So the role of Skip, I had to address his sexuality in the way I addressed it because of the time it was written. I wouldn't have to address it now. And the thing is when people read that book now, they might think, oh, that's a little over the top. Or why is that issue being addressed so much? Well, it had to be then. Now it's common. It's like, imagine this. Imagine the TV series Schitt's Creek, which is probably the funniest show ever produced. Imagine that show 20 years ago. It wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked because society wasn't ready to see a TV series where the fact that there was a homosexual in the show, in a loving, wonderful relationship, wasn't addressed. That it wasn't an issue. But since it was done now, they could create this wonderful, happy world where being gay wasn't an issue. It just was. And it was beautiful how they handled it. They didn't handle it. It just was. And that was perfect. But 20 years ago, it wouldn't have worked. Because things change. Because society evolves. And in some cases, society devolves, but that's another issue for another time. Anyway, my point is that as an author, if I look back at my older works, I might cringe a little bit, or I might be really proud. But what I should not ever do is look at them and say, maybe those shouldn't exist. Because they should exist. Because you wrote them for a reason. And hopefully you had a good reason to write them. And I did. I did have a good reason to write Shiro and A Blade Away. It was a positive reason. It was a celebration. It was a celebration of the LGBTQ community, of a celebration of people who touched me, who became a part of my life. And as a straight man, it was an honor for me to be able to celebrate this community 20 years ago. They deserved the celebration then, and they deserve it now. I have some absolutely dear and wonderful friends who are a part of that community, and I consider myself a part of that community, even though it's adjacent. Even though I'm straight, but I still feel like I'm a part of that community because they mean a lot to me, and hopefully I have done something to help them. Anyway, that's all I've got, Muse, today. I hope I address this in a fitting way. This is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. But anyway, be you and be proud of who you are at all times, because you, every one of you, are awesome. I gotta do something about that furnace. Woo!